We're good to go.
Okay, I'll call our meeting to order. 7:01. Our first item is the approval of the agenda, including the introduction of the late items that came. So I think those will be part of section 5.
Yes.
And hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit.
Did you want to
If
talk about
there's nothing
timing?
else? Oh, timing? Well, I was going to say that the section 5, we will probably let go long if we need it and allow items to push back unless anyone else objects. Okay, so if needed, we'll let that time of 45 minutes grow to what's needed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, item 2 is the adoption of the minutes from last meeting. I realize we have a couple of new faces that weren't part of that meeting, but are we okay to adopt those meeting minutes?
Move to adopt.
Move to adopt, okay. I think I saw Councillor Getty as well. So then we've got section 3 as welcome and introductions. So I'll go first, but I suggest that we all kind of give a little bit of a background as to what brought us to BIMTAC. So my name is Tyler Davenport. My primary reason for joining BIMTAC was simply to volunteer. BIMTAC and the FAC seemed like areas where I might be able to help. I think I've been participating in BIMTAC for a little over 4 years. I've spent many years on Bowen. I grew up here from I think it was age of 2 to maybe 18 when I moved out. And then I've moved back in the last 7 years with my family. We commute by a mix of car, bus, and bike. So I'm pretty subject to the challenges of Bowen transportation. And I think that's it. How can we order this? I've got Illy next on my screen.
Okay, I'll go next. Hi, Ely Allen. And the multi-use path is what sort of brought me to the Transportation Advisory Committee. And yeah, I've been on Bowen for 23 years now and got a couple kids. I work at the building center. You may recognize me from there. I've been on BIMTAC for, I don't even know how long. Steph, do you know? 6
4.5 years.
Feels like 10. No, it's not. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you. I see Matt next.
I guess I'm one of the new faces on the committee. I'm relatively new to Bowen. I've been here for about 2.5 years. I'm an executive with Cubic. So I've worked in transportation for about 15 years. We operate the Compass platform for TransLink in Metro Vancouver. So we provide ITS solutions, automated fare collection technology, both software, hardware. I'm an urban planner with a transportation focus. So I'm passionate about transportation. I'm a bit of a transit nerd. And I joined BIMTAC primarily because, well, I'm concerned about some potential impacts with some transformational projects on the island that are in the planning conceptual stages. So that's why I joined. Live in Tunstall Bay, very end of Tunstall, just before the Cape.
Oh, sounds good. I see Councillor, is it Getty? Am I pronouncing it right, or is it?
Yeah. Getty, yeah. Okay, so Bowen for 43 years, elected to council last October, and I'm not sure why I chose BIMTAC, but it was one of the areas that interested me. So we got to divide up all the committees, and this is one I chose.
Perfect. Councillor Saunders.
Yeah, relatively new compared to everybody else. I've been here, it's coming 3 years now, but it seems like 3 months, and I can't wait for the next 50 or so to go by. So, because I love it here. I just got elected to council as Judy did in October of this year. And not really sure why I got talked into it. And as for why BIMTAC, actually just a little more background. I was back in my youth, I was a professional hockey player, and that ended when my body fell apart. Went to get a real job, couldn't find one, joined the RCMP. And then after a dozen years of that, I started running a security company, which I've been doing for 25 years now. So as far as this committee itself and why BIMTAC, mostly because I knew Judy was going to be on it and I wanted to work with her. So that was kind of my life's goal. Thanks.
We have to
Betty
talk.
Morton? Oh,
That's me. Am I unmuted? I am.
yes.
I'm just an interested volunteer. I've volunteered on several committees over a few years. I've been on Bowen 13 years, and I guess Ilya knows me because I'm always at the building center. I built a few houses here, one of them on White Sails, just as they were logging Cape Roger Curtis for the Cape on Bowen development. And my background is planning, systems change, that kind of thing. Transportation, because it's one of those skeletons in a community, and I have not served on a transportation committee before, and I'm just interested in it.
Good. Becca Larson?
Hi, thanks for having me. I have lived on Bowen on and off for 46 years. So really since I was born. I commute to downtown Vancouver. I'm an RN in emergency at St. Paul's Hospital. And my husband commutes to Coquitlam. He's a career firefighter. We both worked throughout the pandemic. We never stopped commuting and really saw the impact that the increase in day trippers had during the pandemic. So my real reason for wanting to join this committee is because it's really hard for us to get to work. And I commute at all different times. I'm not a Monday to Friday person. I do night shifts. I come home from night shifts. I do early morning, later at night, and I see the impact. And it's really difficult. It's going to make it really difficult as we continue to grow for us to have people that go to the city and work. So I thought maybe I could help.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Fitzpatrick?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for those introductions. My name is Jeff Fitzpatrick. I'm the Division Manager of Regional Park Design and Development with Metro Vancouver, a planner and landscape architect by trade, and with a background in parks and greenway design and planning. I'm here to support the discussion on the proposed park at Cape Roger Curtis, the rezoning application. That's before the committee in support of Daniel. And very happy to be here, very happy to answer any questions. And I am battling a bit of a bug, so bear with me if I'm a little bit congested and coughing tonight, but I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Wake?
Yeah, I have been on Bowen since 2009. I was in Whistler before that. I served a term on council there, and I was actually on the transportation committee there. And I thought just the way things were going on Bowen, I wanted to get involved. So I ran again, I ran in the fall election and got elected, and now I'm on this committee, and it's pretty exciting. There's a lot going on. And so I'm glad to be part of the discussion, and I hope we can move things forward.
Thank you. Natasha Chung?
Hello, everyone. You can hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great, awesome. So I'm Natasha Chong. I'm the Island Community Planner, so staff liaison for BIMTAC. I have been with BIM for just under a year and a half now. My areas of interest are primarily in housing affordability and transportation equity. And I have work experience in the nonprofit sector and other local municipalities throughout Vancouver and Toronto. I'm looking forward to meeting everyone and getting to know you all. So thanks for coming out.
Thank you. And then I think we just have Daniel, and the next section's also for you.
Thanks, Tyler. So I'm Daniel Martin. I'm the manager of planning and development here with the Bowen Island Municipality. I've been here since the summer of 2015, so almost 8 years. Yeah, and then I'm here tonight specifically for the council referral.
Okay, and with that, I think we can, oh, we have public comments, but I don't think we have any public comments. Do we, Steph?
No.
Okay, so we'll be on to council referral.
Okay, great. So I have a short presentation just to give people a overview, and then I've added some slides with the studies that were sent as late items that we received last week. So I'll just go over that maybe and then open it up for discussion if that works. Okay. So as people on the committee are no doubt aware, the municipalities received an application for a rezoning and official community plan change from Metro Vancouver for a proposed regional park at Cape Roger Curtis. So over 24 of the lots of the 24 of the 10-acre lots that are there. So it's to rezone the property to a park zone with a zone variation over a portion of the site to permit supervised overnight use of up to 100 campsites. And on the side of the screen here is the sort of the proposed site plan that's underway at this point. And so you can see the range of campsites. So the walk-in bike tent camping, the group tent camps, car accessible tent camping, and tent cabins. In terms of the current land use, the land is designated as R rural in the official community plan. And the zoning for the properties is currently rural residential 1. And so that zoning permits, is sort of our standard rural zone. It permits 1 dwelling and 1 accessory dwelling on a lot. So the 24 lots could have up to 48 total dwellings. The zoning permits some overnight use already. So it permits the residential guest accommodation, which is the accessory use of permitted dwellings. It permits up to 5 bed and breakfast rooms as home occupation. And then the other thing that our land use bylaw has is it has this section that is uses permitted in all zones. So we permit bicycle paths, equestrian trails, pedestrian trails, boardwalks, educational interpretive signage, open space, natural parks in all zones. And so some portions of the park that is proposed would be permitted in this zone or in any zone. So several of the municipal parks operate in land zoned for residential under this clause, as does the Bowen Conservancy has purchased 3 of the lots at Cape Roger Curtis to run a nature reserve. And so again, under the rural residential 1, that would be permitted or is permitted. But the rezoning application and OCP amendment specifically is to address that overnight camping use. This I know is hard to see, especially depending on the size of your screen, but this is trying to outline where we are in the process. So this application was introduced to council February 27th. And at that point, council referred it to a number of committees and agencies and to open houses. And so where we are right now is doing those committee meetings before returning to council for further discussion and direction. So we're scheduled to return to council April 11th, so this coming Tuesday, to present council with results of this referral and other referrals and seek direction on how council wants to proceed based on that. And this is just that council direction from February 27th. So you can see, I think 9 committees in all and a number of other agencies. And so this is one of those referrals. And then this is just some of the information, more just to generate discussion. But so late last week, we circulated those 2 reports. So a Bunt and Associates trip generation review, which looked at vehicle trip generation from the park campground, or the overnight use component of the park campground, and looked at it in comparison to a number of scenarios for development under the current zoning. And I can return to this in our discussion if that's helpful. And then a second report was the Metro Vancouver summary of approaches to implementation and visitation operations and access. So it looked at things, and that's where Metro's provided some of their data on estimated campground occupancy that's here. Estimated number of people camping per night by month. So the May to October, when they're proposing having camping open. Their estimated overnight visitors by month based on that campground breakdown. And I think it's the last one I put in is total estimated visits. So there, if you look at the report, there's some discussion about number of visitations to Crippen Park currently, and then an estimate of what day visits would look like at the proposed regional park. And then also included in that report was discussion of some alternate routes. So DC Road, Thompson Road, Hazard Creek route in. And then just in terms of general referrals to these committees. So we've been to a number of these committees at this point, and saying sort of council is seeking recommendations from advisory committees on this application, and different committees have chosen different approaches on what sort of feedback to provide to council from the referral. So it can take the form of sort of general comments from the committee. It can be guiding principles for council to consider in a rezoning. It can be an overall recommendation on the application. So, recommend proceeding or not proceeding, or it could be recommendations on what additional information is needed for the committee to make a recommendation to council. All right, and I'll stop sharing at that point, and hand it back to you, Tyler, for any discussion.
Okay, well, I guess the information that was just provided to me seemed quite interesting. I'm wondering, the first thing that I found the most concerning was the ferry use projection. So they've gone in with the reference document for traffic generation and got a figure of 9.46 per unit for vehicle trip generation, and then applied that to the 24 lots to get this 248 trips, single leg trips, I believe it was, as additional traffic for the ferry. However, Bowen has better numbers on what happens with homes and the ferry, being that we have 1,900 homes and our peak daily ferry usage is approximately 1,900, which puts us at about a multiplier of 1. So it seems like they're overestimating the ferry usage of the current plan for 24 lots by a factor of 10. And the conclusion that comes from this is that they are claiming that the park is a reduction in ferry traffic, which doesn't need to do anything. If we take a more realistic number based off what we actually see of a multiplier of 1, we would see a land use, the existing land use causing 24 single leg ferry trips, or actually I think it's 18, and compare that to 68 for the drive-in sites. So I was initially the most worried that this conclusion that the new proposed land use is a reduction in ferry traffic is going to completely skew the conversation, because that number clearly needs to be revisited. I was wondering if that's come up yet.
I guess in terms of just background, it's like, so we received the reports on Thursday for Metro Vancouver, and obviously circulated them Friday with the committee. So we haven't had sort of a chance to even as staff, we've sort of put it out for review internally, but haven't come back to Metro with any questions. But knowing that this committee was meeting today, we thought, okay, this is a great chance for the committee to get a chance to review as well. But you know, I think I would say I would agree with some of like that same concern, sort of looking at some of the numbers, thinking like, okay, maybe that came from some overall manual, but doesn't seem to necessarily fit with Bowen's experience.
Well, if we use the number that came from the manual and apply it to our population, we're going to, that would predict that we are overrunning the ferry's current capacity by a factor of 10.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my first comment, is that Bunt report needs to be revisited in light of the publicly available ferry ridership and census data for Bowen. Then my next personal point of interest was whether or not Metro has any walk-in camping, and how in fact somebody would separate walk-in camping from vehicle access camping. So those were the two biggest things that stood out to me as things I'd want more information on. I do have more, but I'll open up the floor for others to comment. Anybody interested? I saw Matt unmuted first. Is that?
Well, I'm curious about some of the underlying assumptions, particularly around seasonal homeownership. Also, I note that there's a different, I guess, structure of campsite in terms of walk-in, bike-in, and I'm curious if the assumption was that people would, commute by that same method of accessing the campsite, because I would have some concerns about that as well. I mean, what's preventing someone from, bringing a single occupant vehicle on the ferry and then parking it somewhere on, on the island and then biking in? So I'm curious as to how mode split came into it, and whether that same mode split was applied to single family homes in the Cape, because that seems a little unfair to say that, a third of people will commute to the campsite via, active modes of transportation, yet homeowners in the Cape will only drive vehicles. And I think I was watching the previous TAC committee meeting that suggested that about 74% of people access Metro Vancouver Parks by car. So there seemed to be a gap in that. Also, when we talk about Airbnb and short-term accommodation on the island, it was unclear to me whether there was any consideration for the restrictions that BIM places on short-term rentals. I know that they can only be rented for about, I think it's 100, 120 days of the year. So it wasn't clear if the assumption was that, if people did have a suite and they were to rent it through short-term accommodation, whether that was, 100% of the time or whatnot. So that was also unclear to me. Also, it seemed to be a desktop review, so it was unclear whether the researchers had ever visited Bowen or, looked at existing data that we have. So those are just some general comments. I think more about methodology and underlying assumptions were a little concerning. So that's all I have.
Councillor Getty, did you throw a hand up?
Unmute.
I'm trying to find the Bunt report. I found it very, very difficult to read and quite confusing. I thought the numbers changed. I'm not at all comfortable in terms of accepting it until I've had a chance to try to figure out. And I've got a bunch of questions in terms of where all the numbers came from, and the 83% and the 43% and the differences between Crippen's daily visits. The low was 504 a day and the high was 1,583 a day, with 50% local. And then somehow or other, when they went later and started to figure out the 82% factor with reduced, and they highlighted that there was reduced accessibility to Cape Roger Curtis by foot and bike, but that's the part that we're counting on in terms of all of these walk-in things. So in the one hand, the report is admitting that it's difficult to get to by foot and bike. At the same time, we're going to try and figure out how to get people there by foot and bike. You know, and whether we have the bike racks on the front of the buses and get them as close as we can, and then they get the last couple of mountains to go down and cliffs to go up and whatever. But there's just a whole lot of information there that's very late coming, and it's hard to figure out where all the numbers change and vary. So I don't know if we want to spend a lot of time going through it line by line. I know, Betty, you put in a great big long letter about it. I haven't even really had a chance to digest all of that, but I have questions in terms of the reliability of that information. And the other thing is that it's ignoring the bottlenecks that we've got in Horseshoe Bay and Snug Cove and White Sails, and it's ignoring all of the day trippers and how they get over there, and whether or not they, you know, see Crippen at the same time, or they, you know, do have a picnic lunch and then take off and look at a beach on the west side and do whatever they're going to do on the rest of the day. It's still, the day trippers are more likely, if we don't have a shuttle set up, they're the ones that are going to be coming over, I think, most likely by single vehicle, and that those numbers aren't included in this report, and they say they won't be included unless and until there's the rezoning. So, and that at this point we don't have the rezoning, and I guess that's the one that we're trying to be persuaded into allowing. So that's why we've got all these numbers, but it's in conjunction with the day visitors too. And I think that that's, you know, the overall transportation that we're looking at in terms of this proposal is to the point where if we're going to have X number of day visitors, and they're more likely, if they're not able to get on the shuttle, and we don't have an increased bus service of some description, they're not going to hitchhike. And you know, how do we count and deal with those numbers? I think just the size of the parking lot alone is a question of where that's going to be. But I struggle with that, and I think that the Metro report, it's, you know, we're moving in the right direction in terms of identifying and dealing with issues, but it doesn't help me to have our transportation report quoted in terms of, you know, we have idealistic ideas about the multi-use path, but you know, the numbers of people that are actually using it and getting out of cars, I think, is not high enough. And I don't see any kind of potential of having a multi-use path, particularly along White Sails. I like that suggestion that we had the last meeting, but anyway, I have problems just digesting all of this from Friday.
Okay,
Thanks.
Betty, I think you were next.
Yeah, Judy, I thought you did a pretty good job, actually. It's not very digestible. And I think one of my frustrations with it is that it sort of muddles up together the useful information we need to seriously look at the transportation issues with all these speculations about what the Cape on Roger Curtis could possibly be if all the houses were built out 40 years from now. And I think that for the purposes of actually moving forward, that we shouldn't be, it's almost like we're trying to be convinced that that a park is better than the existing residences, but that's not really what our job should be. That's council's job. What our job should be is looking at the transportation scenarios, and so don't conflate it with all that other data. And I agree with Judy that we need the foundational as is transportation information. We need a counter on white sales and out at the Cape right now so that we know what our baseline numbers are. And we need really concrete numbers from Crippen Park. I don't think it's that useful to compare to other parks around the region because we are an island. We know that people who come here make the rounds, they go to the beaches, they go to different parks, they hike in different places, they go in and out to restaurants. So I would like to see us really focus on a transportation plan that really addresses the scenario of a campground development that we're trying to evaluate. And I honestly think that what we've been given, the Blunt Associates plan and the previous one that was in the packets, are so biased that really what we need is for the municipality to be funded to do their own transportation study, setting their own criteria, and with people who know the situation on Bowen.
Jeffrey, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you for all those questions. Lots of good ones. I'll just address a few, and I'm happy to take my cues from Daniel whenever that would be helpful. The first one I made a note of was, Tyler, your question about the 226 number. And if I remember correctly, I believe that is a comparison of trips in, vehicle trips in and out of the site, which does not equate to ferry trips directly. So I did want to clarify that, but I certainly take your point on the local data. In terms of some of the detailed questions that have come up or may come up after further reflection on this, through Daniel, we would love to see them so we could respond to those directly, or point them in the right direction. Tyler, what was your second question? You had a second one. Oh, how do you differentiate between vehicular camping and non-vehicular camping? Yes, that was your question, right? Your second question? Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think the rezoning application proposes up to 100 sites. Of those, 45 would have some form of vehicular access attached to them, i.e. a place to park one car. Though that includes, so of that 45, that includes the group sites and the single occupancy sites. So the rest would only be accessible by way of shuttle, bike, or hike-in, with no parking associated with the camping spot. So it's basically just a place to pitch a tent. It's a very rustic, low impact sort of experience. Councillor Getty, you raised some questions on day use numbers. In one of the reports that was provided, those day use numbers are provided, the projections of what those could look like. And it's a bit of a art and a science predicting day use numbers of a park. What we've done is looked at Crippen and then parks across the system and tried to work backwards from those to provide a range of what we could expect based on that. But in terms of the detailed technical questions, I'd be happy to try to field them, and any I can't, I can provide further information to this group.
Well, I'd like to commend you first for doing this, for standing up in front of a group of 12 and being hit with all these questions. But I am going to pick on you a little bit. Sure. So your Bunton Associates report says, under potential ferry impact, the 63 peak day two-way campground vehicle trips represent a 72% reduction when compared to the potential impact generated by the single family units. So it does specifically say, or make a comparison against the 248 number, and the conclusions all state that the park is going to generate a reduction in ferry traffic. So I would like you to take that question back. I think they've made a mistake. I think they need to revisit the census data and ferry usage and recalibrate their numbers, because the tone of the summary of this report makes me think that they're essentially concluding that the park is a reduction in ferry use, therefore not our problem, not part of this application. when in fact, I think that you're actually about a 300% increase in ferry use for that land just for your drive-in sites. So there should be further discussion about ferry impact and mitigating factors and moving off peak time. So I think that's quite important, and I would like you to take that back. I'm happy to lay it out in an email offline because we don't need to go through a whole bunch of numbers right now. But the second one about differentiating between the groups, like when I picture a walk-in campground or a hike-in campground, normally, in my experience, you drive to a parking lot, you depart your vehicle, and you begin a on-foot trip. So I think we need to define where we think these people are going to end their car trip and begin their foot trip. And how do you prevent somebody from ending their car trip in Matt's yard at the end of Tunstall Bay and walking into their campsite in the Cape? And I think that's a bit of a challenge because the idea of having foot access or bike access camping that reduces load on all this infrastructure sounds great, but I don't know how many people believe that it's going to work based on people's current trends.
Yeah, those are some great questions. I'll take a stab at them as best I can. Yeah, so the first part with the reference to the 226, I think you're and again, the work isn't done, right? This is the Bunt is still doing work, and they're going to look at the ferry data in closer detail. I think what they're pointing to is that based on what is approved through the existing zoning, the proposed campground use would be less than that. Now, they need to look at the ferry numbers in greater detail, to your point, and certainly they will. In terms of accessing the non-car access campsites, you're quite right that an integrated approach is necessary. Now, I do want to clarify, not just hike in, it could be hike, bike, or shuttle. And that shuttle service needs to consider the mainland side of the equation as well. So you could get shuttle service to the ferry, you could get shuttle service in Snug Cove, you could bike along an improved greenway to the park, or you could hike if you so endeavor. So again, it's an integrated way to do that, and a reservation system would be required, and the monitoring of the site is an important aspect of that. And of course, working closely with Bowen Island Municipality on parking restrictions in and around the park there, outside of the park, is important as well. Another important aspect of getting that system to work as it needs to is adaptive management. And one of the reports that we provided was a phased approach. And as we roll out this, or as we would roll out any service in a regional park, there needs to be an opportunity to develop a plan and implement it with due time to adjust as required. So the first round of hike-in, bike-in sites, perhaps there would be 15, and the park shuttle would be in place day one. So we would have some time to monitor that to see, is this working as we intended? Do we need to change course with the reservation system? What is not working, and so on. So just a few comments, Tyler, in regards to that question.
Okay, I think I'll jump to Becca. You've been waiting a while.
Well, Tyler, you kind of asked the same or implied the same question. So I'm looking at 5.1 campground vehicle trips. It specifically states that there are going to be 55 walk-in, bike-in, 5 tent cabin sites that are to be accessible by sustainable modes only. And it specifically says these will have no car trips associated with them. So I'm wondering, who is policing that? Will Metro Vancouver have somebody above the ticket booth in Horseshoe Bay saying, hey, you can't drive over? Because as a family of 4, when my kids were little, there's no way that I would have ever gone camping without a vehicle. You can't carry all your stuff. even if I was going to, where are they going to park in Horseshoe Bay? I guess that's my second question. Because there is very limited parking in Horseshoe Bay. I think that that line specifically should be omitted from this survey. It's very misleading. And unless Metro Vancouver is willing to specifically police it, you can't state that.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I think that the difference when we're talking about the non-car accessible sites, we're not talking about like a traditional drive-in BC campground site. These are there simply is no place to park your car, and there's so it's just not that kind of facility. But I do take your point about the desire for some traditional car access campsites. There are 25 to 35 of those proposed that could be reserved, and that's a recognition that you know, some folks with kids and some folks just have a preference, or folks with mobility challenges or whatever require a car to access that kind of experience. But for the other sites that are proposed, it's a different kind of experience. It's low impact, it's light, and it's not intended to be accessed by cars. But there will be a portion of those that would be accessible to families and others.
So Metro does have transit accessible camping. Is that correct? I can't remember which site it is, whether it's the one out near Fort Langley or the one on the Fraser River. But I believe I looked up that you do have one that is transit accessible. I'd be curious to know what percentage of the traffic to that campsite is currently busing to go camping.
Yeah, I can access that, or we can look into that for you. I think what we are proposing here is a little bit different from transit access. We're proposing to provide a dedicated park shuttle and actually not have the means to accept those kind of camping vehicles on site. So I believe some of the sites in Fort Langley and Dees Island are accessible by transit, but they're also accessible by cars. And they were kind of designed in that era for that kind of use. And transit, it's not really as frequent or dedicated. So it's a bit of a different scenario, but can have a look at what we got elsewhere.
Okay, Tim?
Okay, I've had a couple of my questions answered, but I think the overarching comment I want to make is that, and I was very happy to see the phased part of the implementation that Jeff was referring to. And it's phase 1, 2025, phase 2, 2027, and phase 3, 2029. So and if I understand it right, we're going to start small and evaluate, and then increase as we feel appropriate. And that's number one, going to confirm these numbers that we're trying to guess at right now, and it's pretty tough to agree on those numbers, but they don't really matter so much if we have actual numbers once we get started, as long as we keep those numbers low enough so that the associated transportation problems and reservation challenges are also manageable, and we can tweak and work with those systems and ramp up as we need to. And I don't quite understand why we're trying to figure out what the ultimate maximum is when we can actually do that by starting small. As far as the how do we make sure somebody who's coming to a walk-in site isn't bringing their car? I presume there would be a reservation system. So if you got a reservation for a walk-in site, then you also got a reservation for a shuttle. And if you didn't show up on that shuttle and tried to drive your car and you managed to get your car on the ferry and go in, well, your entry wouldn't be valid. Or something like that. But all these systems need to be worked out. And there's examples, we have examples of these in some of the parks in the US. And actually a park or a backcountry area that I'm involved with up in Yoho Park called Lake O'Hara, where they've been limiting the access since 1975 on the reservation system and the shuttle. And it can be done, but we've really got to get to the point where we work on that. And in this case, we also have residents who are going to want to use not so much the camping, but the day use. So how do we make sure that residents and people with reservations there's enough capacity for all of them? So I guess the big thing, and then my question to Jeff is, have I got it right about the way this phasing is going to work?
Yes, exactly correct. That's exactly correct.
Okay, Matthew, your hand's been up for a while.
Yeah, not to belabor the point, but I think, Becca made a good kind of point, right? Is that I think it would be a hasty generalization to assume that just because there's a certain number of campsites that are designated as walk-in or bike-in, that is how those people will access the island. And then to turn around and say that, homeowners or developers in the Cape who are building single-family homes on those 24 lots will exclusively use private vehicles. I can speak from my own personal experience. I flew home from California on a business trip on Saturday. I fly to London on Thursday. I will not touch my vehicle, right, between Saturday and Thursday. So it's, again, you can't extrapolate my own personal experience, but I know a lot of people who in the Cape, who once they're on Bowen, they might only leave Bowen once a week. People who live out there do not live or work in the city in conventional 9-to-5 jobs. So I also think the report fails to acknowledge more flexible work from home arrangements that a lot of people have post-pandemic. Whether they sustain in future years remains to be seen. But yeah, I have serious doubts about the report.
Okay. Eddie, is your hand still up?
It is. And yes, some of my question's been answered, but when you talk about a shuttle, how many trips a day are you thinking it'll make? Like, is it continuously going between the Snug Cove and the Cape, or is it going just to deliver at a camp sign-in time and leaving time, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. And the minutia of the details we still need to figure out as we move forward here. But the proposal would be to run a dedicated park shuttle that would run continuously through the day. Now we would need to consider the timing of that as it relates to people coming off the ferry, as it relates to campground reservations, and so on. But it would be dedicated for park use, and it would run throughout the day.
So I'm counting something like 300 campers who should probably be on the shuttle buses. So I assume, being on Bowen, it would be 15 or 20 passengers. So that's quite a few people to move on one shuttle, even continuously. I just point that out. And the Cape is not really that walking friendly or that bicycle friendly. A lot of the trails are pretty vertical, and one is much more likely to leave a car at one end of the trail and hike from the other end of the trail. And particularly if you have kids in tow. So I'm thinking that a shuttle also needs to service people that are day trippers and people that are camping there and want to move somewhere beyond their camp space. And then I'm also thinking that there are when people come to Bowen, they don't just come to camp. I mean, one example is weddings in the summer. We have them every weekend, lots of them. And those guests would love to have a group camp and to camp. And they will get in their car and come in and out to party and to meet up at beaches and to go to music events and all sorts of things. And they'll use it like their B&B or their hotel room, because we don't have hotels on Bowen. So I think, you know, we keep throwing shuttle out, but I don't think that necessarily means less vehicle trips on our roads and in our communities. And then while I'm talking, I've been polling all my nieces and nephews who camp, a lot of them at places like Protection Island, Newcastle Island, Salt Spring at Ruckle Park. And what they tell me is when they go with their 2 or 3 kids, that they take the car and they unload everything and then they go and park somewhere. And whether they park in the Conservancy parking lot or over in Matthews driveway or along Tunstall Boulevard, that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, I see. Oh, go ahead, Jeff, if you were going to respond.
Yeah, no, thanks for those. And yeah, I mean, great questions. Just in terms of the numbers you mentioned before, keep in mind there's 55 sites that are proposed to have access without that are supposed to be non-vehicular focused sites, and people tend to stay 2.5 days ish per site, and there's a continual rotation. So it wouldn't be a matter of sort of 300 people arriving en masse, and we would need to look at the reservation system to get the right rhythm and make that sustainable. The phased approach to getting the shuttle exactly right, I think, is important. There's a lot to consider there in terms of getting it to work well for days visitors and overnight visitors, and also the receiving end of things and drop off end of things in Snug Cove and at the proposed park. So just a few comments.
Okay, I see a couple more hands. I want to interject another possible point that we haven't talked about much first, and that's the actual ferry capacity left. If we look at the numbers projected, like there's 68 two-way trips or 30 p.m. arrivals, I think it is, and we take a look at our busier 6 months of ferry traffic, which hovers at around 70% utilization, which ferries admits is kind of the point where things start to fall apart. We then look at your proposed check-in times starting after 1 p.m. If we take a look at those 6 sailings between 2 and whatever the finish would be, 8, as the likely travel sailings for coming to Bowen, looking at last summer's data, the capacity left to fill up those sailings completely would be exceeded, like completely taken up by that park travel on Friday, Saturday, Thursday, and then almost fully used up on Wednesday, Tuesday. So that would have the ferries completely chock-a-block at 100% from 2 p.m. until the 9 sailing, all of those days of the week. So that being said, we have no capacity to fix that. BC Ferries doesn't actually have much capacity to fix that. And the whole arrangement is governed by the service agreement with the province. So there's definitely a very large concern with that number and how that would affect travel. So one of the proposed solutions is to encourage, from your either the Metro report or the Bunt report, was to encourage off-peak travel, which we can't actually do unless we implement a reservation system, which BC Ferries has said they're open to. However, Bowen doesn't have the facilities on this side to have controlled staging for the ferry or any further facilities to control or take in reserved sailings and hold out or reserved car spots and exclude non-reserved spots. So there's a whole lot of concern there where the stakeholders, and so the stakeholders being the people who suffer from this system falling apart are the residents, but the people who make these decisions are the province and BC Ferries. And it's hard to see how there could be confidence that we're all going to work together just by accident to make sure that this increase in use pans out. So it'd be interesting to hear if you have engaged with the province and our service agreement with BC Ferries, and how any of those discussions are going, because when BC Ferries was asked for more information, they claimed to be working with Metro currently and kind of deferred to whatever we would see out of Metro.
Yes, yeah, happy to speak to some of those things. So we have reached out to BC Ferries and they've provided us data at this point, and we'll be seeking to work with them as we develop this further, just in terms of some of the numbers you mentioned and some of the tools that we have. The number of sites that have vehicle access there's 45 with some vehicular access proposed. Keep in mind that people tend to stay 2 to 3 days, so there'll be a cycle of people, but it won't be 45 in, 45 out every day. We have the ability through a reservation system to direct people when they need to attend to their site, what day they need to attend to their site, and so that's a tool that we'll have through the campground reservation system, accessing through the site. And in terms of the other tools we have, there's broader tools in terms of an overall reservation system for the park in terms of day use. On busy weekends in the summer, the park might be closed only to vehicle. There might not be vehicle access to the park if need be as a management tool. Just shuttle access and hike and cycle walk-in access. So we have a few tools at our disposal to manage park visitation and capacity, and recognizing that the ferry issue is a big one, and those are just some of the tools we have at hand.
So I don't know if BC Ferries made you aware, but they had a bit of a pilot program where they made evening sailings almost free this last summer to try and move traffic, and they may now have some results as to how flexible that demand was. My informal opinion is that it probably, or my personal opinion is that it probably was not very flexible. But then I'll jump back to the hands that are accumulating. Illy, I think you were up. I think you're muted.
Sorry, I'm not very technological. So say, we go on and I appreciate the whole phased approach and everything, but would we have Bowen Island have any ability to halt at a certain phase if problems cannot be solved? Like, or is this sort of like it'll be the whole phase and it has to keep going until we get to everything happening, even if there are major problems? Like, how does this work as far as us having the ability to halt it? Maybe it doesn't go to that many camping sites or something if it shows that there's major transportation issues or any other issues. I'm just curious about if that's been discussed. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think if I can, Tyler,
yeah,
I would say that that's something we are looking at and considering, is that if that's sort of council's desire to move forward and say, okay, we're comfortable based on the phased approach as we move through the process. It's like what what gets built into the phases and how is that possible? So yeah, and I would say like this is different than maybe a typical like rezoning we would do where we would have phases in a covenant and there'd be sort of delivery of things at certain phases. So like the Grafton Lake development is an example where, through the rezoning, they have to provide amenities and there's a covenant and it lays out in phases the amenities that you provide. What isn't typically built in is sort of that performance metric. And that's the piece that we're looking into that I don't have great examples to point to of how other places have done it. But yes, with that idea in mind in terms of, okay, phasing, but yeah, somehow performance metrics that like, okay, it's not working at this phase. We're not going to move to the next phase until it's sorted out. And how does that get promised and written in? I'm not sure.
That's a really good question and interesting answer. Becca, your hand's been up for a while.
My first question is the shuttle bus. Where would it park and pick passengers up? Because our passenger drop-off, transit bus, school bus section is completely cluttered already. So I'm wondering where Metro Van has thought that would go. And then my other questions are surrounding reservations for BC Ferries. So would residents of Bowen Island have to be paying for reservations $15 a pop? I think it is to reserve the ferry. So if you're a commuter, that adds up a lot if you want to be able to get on the ferry during these peak times where it's full of park users and tourists.
Yeah, the first question is an interesting one about, and I think you're thinking specifically about Snug Cove, and Metro Vancouver has significant land holdings in Snug Cove. In fact, Crippen Regional Park actually kind of hugs the cove and goes right into it. So there's a few options of where a shuttle bus could pickup could happen. We haven't decided on a spot in detail, and we'd want to work closely with Bowen Island Municipality in terms of knitting that in a way that's complementary to the plans for Snug Cove. But a few examples. Seaside Cottage 2, just where the roundabout is at just north of the ferry when you get off, is a Metro Vancouver owned building, and the park is right there. So that might be an opportunity. Davies Orchard is a well-used site. We're currently investing, I think, $1.6 million to upgrade that site. That's another place, probably not a bus pickup place, but a place to orient people, to provide services, to get them into the park. So we do have land holdings there. We don't want to, we need to work with Bowen Island Municipality to figure out exactly how that would look and what improvements are required, but I think there are some options there. In terms of the reservation system, when I'm talking about the reservation system, I'm talking about a park reservation system, not a ferry reservation system. So I
think my question was more in response to like Tyler's talking about ferry capacity and BC Ferries implementing reservation system.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit from my time with BC Ferries' advisory committee. They have said multiple times that they are fully willing to do reservations on Bowen, and the pricing example that they have is for I think it's the Southern Gulf Islands route, requires reservation for all passengers, and it's free. So I believe that on routes where reservations are required, there's no additional fee for that. Judy?
Thank you. When summertime in Horseshoe Bay, it lots of times can be but much less than what goes on Bowen. So we go through all of this rigmarole in terms of getting people over here. If they're in a vehicle, then we've got real problems in terms of space to line up for overloads on boats on this side. And that's the typical times when the cars are going to be leaving, is when everybody else is leaving as well. One of the things that the Muni has struggled with in terms of BC Ferries is not prepared to help pay for any marshalling. Bowen municipality can't really afford to have regular staff hired to do all the marshalling. So is that something that could be included in some of the expenses that Metro would consider helping to pay for? That's one question. And that takes a whole lot of training in terms of, we had one of the marshals that was hired a couple of years ago get bumped by a car because she was telling them not to move and they wanted to move. So it's, takes some fairly formal training in traffic control. The other thing is that if people were to drive all the way to, say, Horseshoe Bay and manage to deal with that getting into the village, which isn't relatively easy, depending on the chaos that's going on with the parking. But is there any chance that Metro could try to find or work a deal maybe with BC Ferries or try to find a parking space there? Or is there Metro space? I don't know if there's free parking at the 2 Golden Towers, but figure out someplace in one of the other parks where shuttles could pick people up so that we don't deal with cars, some of those other kinds of alternatives.
Yeah, I think what you're, thanks for the question. I think what you're speaking to is what we're considering, which is an integrated approach. And it doesn't end or start, I guess, at Snug Cove. In terms of providing access to the park, we think there's a need for shuttle service on the Horseshoe Bay side as well. And what that might look like is having a park shuttle that is tied into transit hubs, or it's tied into some of our parks with large parking facilities. So people go there, get on the shuttle, right to the park. I think ultimately this park is, I know I'm speaking to Islanders, so I don't need to talk about the scenic values and the ecological values. It's tremendous. And there's many great reasons from that perspective to have a park. From a day use visitor perspective, there are challenges to getting there in terms of cost and distance. The ferry is a cost, the travel is a cost, there's a time cost. So ultimately it won't be accessed on a regular basis and to the extent as our other parks. Anyway, I hope that answers your, yeah, I believe that answers your question. Correct, Councillor Getty? Or some of it?
Marshalling?
Right, you asked about Metro Vancouver contributing to marshalling expenses. Ultimately, we're in a rezoning process with BIM, and we'll negotiate contributions to, some municipal things through that. What we're proposing and seeking to do is not to overload the transit systems and the systems that serve Bowen Island through this proposal. So we do not want to put that level of pressure on those systems, but through negotiations, if it was felt that some contribution to that was important, then we can have that discussion.
Okay. Councillor Saunders.
Yeah, thanks. It seems fairly evident to me anyway that one of the solutions ultimately is going to have to include some kind of passenger only traffic coming in, from the other side of the water. And in one of the documents, the implementation document, you've noted that, but it says that the exact wording is aware of the future options for passenger only ferry, and we'll continue to monitor these initiatives. How engaged are you folks in those discussions or initiatives or whatever might be out there? Or is this something you're kind of sitting back and watching, saying, well, if something good happens, that would really help. But I mean, are you guys in any position to kind of push any of this along? Not necessarily financially, although that'd be good too, but just in any way to influence and push a bit, or is that happening at all?
We're aware of them, and we're meeting with the proponents to learn more. I mean, I know Green Line Ferries was recently out having public consultation in the community, and they're exploring a proposal, and others have raised it in the past. So we're aware of it. We're looking at it, how it could be tied into the system, and certainly keeping an eye on it. Yeah.
Betty?
Yeah, I thought you guys talked at the last meeting that I wasn't at about some federal funding or something for transportation that I thought could apply. I had a request, which is when you're looking for really precise and current BC Ferries data, that you include foot passenger data, because it's not frequent, but it does happen that we get overloaded on foot passengers.
Mhm.
All by themselves. And then I was also thinking about the equity issue when you were talking about trying to schedule reservations so that they're outside of peak ferry time, and imagining a family coming from your south of Fraser districts, who I assume are your targets for camping. And they have to, run the gauntlet across the city of Vancouver and through the ferry system and onto the island. And I don't think they're necessarily a good fit for first thing in the morning and late at night. So just a thought in terms of that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Didn't mean to cut you off. No. Yeah. Thanks for those comments. The equity piece is an important one, and one that we're mindful of. I think in any reservation system, in terms of day use or otherwise, we have to look at it through that lens of allowing for some freedom, but restricting access in the times that restriction is required. And I think in terms of the proposed camping use, the sites that are the non-vehicular access sites are actually proposed with an equity lens in mind, recognizing that there's amazing value in accessing overnight time in nature, but there's a lot of folks who don't have a car or choose to live without a car these days. So it provides an opportunity for some of those folks to access nature as well.
The topics you're speaking to, Jeff, sound great, but when we read the documentation, there's no metric or commitment to what triggers and accept, like, what is working and what is not. And I think that has caused a lot of community concern, in that so far, it seems like we are saying that you're going to monitor the situation and adjust the plan through this adaptive process based on whether things are working or not. But the community doesn't see any metrics or agreed benchmarks that dictate whether it is working. Because what might be working from a camper's perspective may not be working for the community members or any other user groups. Do you have any thoughts on ways to clarify that or outline that process in a bit of a binding way?
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of how we would monitor and adapt, there would be a few touch points. One would be the data we have for managing the park, in terms of, there's the metrics within the park. How are people getting there? What is the experience of park neighbors that we're hearing from staff? Are we getting complaints? Are we getting kudos? We track all that stuff. We track our incidents, how people get there. We have all that data. The other data points would be through the community, and we would likely look to Bowen Island Municipality as a funnel for that information, either through committees like this and or through public input or other metrics. There could be different ways to seek that input. Typically, what we do across the regional park system in all of our parks is work closely with the municipality. If and when the issues come up, we work together to solve them. So it's an important touch point for us. And in terms of, you know, explaining in a detailed way how we would monitor and adapt, we can certainly do that.
How about the binding word?
Well, I mean, it's certainly possible. Usually when we're downzoning land for less intensive use, we don't have binding conditions. But of course, if Bowen Island Municipality wished to include a binding metric for evaluation, that I suppose that could be a condition of rezoning.
Becca, your hand.
Yeah, just to comment on the if and when things come up, like I think that's the huge fear with the community, is that we don't want to wait for the if and when. We want solid answers prior, so that we don't come faced with these issues with the ferry and our roads and the transportation issues that we have without this extra park. I mean, just people driving on the ferry as day trippers since COVID is like, I've seen it, it's crazy. And then just to comment on ferry capacity for sailing on off-peak ferries outside of the 10 a.m. and 1800 mark. I catch the 8 a.m. ferry home from the city frequently. It is consistently overloaded. And it's consistently overloaded with people that do a backward commute to Bowen Island, IPS children, and contractors coming over to the island. So that outside of 10 to 6 should really be considered, because that 8 a.m. ferry is very full. And same going, the 7:30 ferry going to Bowen is almost always, or back to town, is almost always during the school year an overload.
Okay, Matthew.
Yeah, I just want to revisit this topic of equity. Transportation is the second highest household expenditure in British Columbia, according to Statistics Canada. And I'm wondering to what extent Metro Vancouver evaluated transportation costs in terms of the camping proposal aspect of its rezoning application. Because I would venture a guess, when I factor a 3-zone fare structure, assuming someone's coming from south of the Fraser, is over $6, and a foot passenger ticket is in excess of $10. For a family of 4, I mean, you're looking at $60 to $70 in transportation costs just to access camping, let alone camping fees. So I would guess that there's a lot more accessible, not only from a transportation perspective, but also from a cost perspective for camping elsewhere in Metro Vancouver. So did you factor that into your proposal at all, and look at alternative camping sites across Metro Vancouver?
There's a few ways we are looking at equity of access to the site. One being equity of access for people without a car to access the site, in terms of their ability to access the site by way of shuttle or bike or walk-in. And we know that increasingly that's a growing segment of the population in Metro Vancouver, and we know that people are living in denser urban areas without the ability to access nature, and they're choosing to live without a car. So we know that's a growing piece of it. But in regard to the equity piece in terms of cost, I guess there's a few ways to look at that. For folks who would choose to access the site with a vehicle, There certainly is the ferry cost, no doubt. Sorry, go ahead.
Just the example I gave you is the most economical way to get to Bowen Island. And for a family of 4, it would be close to about $70, if not more. So I would imagine if I was living in, Surrey, there's probably, cheaper alternatives. So it doesn't strike me as a very affordable camping experience when you factor in the most economical way to get here. 3-zone fare structure, foot passenger ticket, even with the shuttle, right? You still have to pay the foot passenger fare. So unless that's subsidized, I don't know. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what the cost is an important factor. I think just the ability to access it without a vehicle. If you're choosing to live without a vehicle, there's that lens. In terms of the cost lens for folks who would struggle with the cost of bus fares or shuttle service, we do have a foundation. And in the past, we've worked with them to provide access to nature programs, interpretation, access to parks for new Canadians and other groups who struggle with the cost of accessing park space. So it's a comprehensive approach we're looking at. There's the cost piece that you've raised, and there's also just the ability to access nature close to home without a car, and for folks living without a car. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, I'm muted. No, I'm not. So our goal today was to come up with a recommendation to council. Is that something we feel like we can do?
I've lost confidence in that. Perhaps I can try to put something together from this excellent conversation and share it with the group for a approval. Unless you have 3 or 4 specific bullet points.
So I have 3 maybe
Okay.
topics that I think maybe the wording, ironing out the wording might take some offline work, but I think
Sure, but can I put them on screen for the group, Tyler?
sure. Well, I don't know. Are you
I think I might already have their first one.
okay? Okay, yeah, ferry
Sorry, these are
ride.
notary notes, sorry. Mhm.
But yeah, my first point would be that the ferry user predictions don't seem to match Bowen Island's available data. So I agree with that first point.
Okay, so does that work? Okay. We can work off that offline then?
Yeah, the just speaking about the general topic, I think the first one works for me. The second one would be to include the non-vehicle traffic, because the walk-in sites were excluded, but we have buses and other types of transportation to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third one that I have would be to request a detailed plan for how you would ensure that foot-only traffic doesn't take their car to Bowen, because Jeff does have some good ideas. I think it would be a good topic or thing to flush out. And then I had another one.
I just Betty had a comment about getting baseline numbers for white cells. Is that something that we think is a realistic request?
Well, isn't that a request to our council?
Okay.
I was thinking specifically of requests for council to Metro at this point.
Okay. And then did we something about current campsites, like providing numbers from current campsites, for example, Fort Langley?
Sure, we could include that, but it was actually how metrics for whether or not an adaptive plan were working could be developed and implemented. So I can't see, let me switch my view so I can see all the members of the committee. Feel free to jump in here. For the new faces, you're welcome to chime in. And
So just for the new people, normally how this goes is there's discussion amongst committee members, and I come out with brilliant pearls of wisdom taken from your words. This particular rezoning application it's not been that simple to distinguish between requests and questions and comments. So if you'd like to contribute the main points you would like council to hear at this point, not necessarily for Jeff to hear, but for council to hear.
I have.
Yes.
I would like to recommend that Metro collaborate with Bowen Municipality to establish a marine transport and docking option to move visitors from Vancouver to Bowen Island with a funding plan. It might include federal money, it might include user pay component. I'm thinking of what happened when we had the foot passenger ferry for the commuters that Peter's bus picked up. We were able to do it then. I don't see why we can't do it again.
Right.
I think Metro should come back to us with some sort of, or that council recommends that they should make some sort of solid commitment and planning to ferry marshaling on our side.
That should be a requirement of a rezoning, absolutely. That's a recommendation, in my opinion, to council.
So you want that to be a separate recommendation? Okay, or
Yeah, it's
as a
a
condition of rezoning?
It's a condition of rezoning, I think so.
Okay. Okay, great. This is great.
Yeah, I agree.
Great.
a condition of rezoning, like we are now, I know, I understand, but we are specifying a solution to a problem that's not necessarily fully flushed out. And correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but this, like, if you made ferry marshaling part of a rezoning, couldn't this end up being a ridiculous sore thumb of a requirement if somehow ferry traffic petered off or situations change? Wouldn't you still have this paper requirement for ferry marshaling?
I guess depending how it is structured.
Like, I would much rather see the expansion of the park tied to performance metrics that would allow these conversations to happen as needed than to predict what the solutions are at such an early stage and recommend that those get built in, because we don't even know that that's not even necessarily going to fix anything. Ferry marshaling would be a requirement of the disaster we're predicting, but it doesn't fix the problem.
Do you want to?
It's just a Band-Aid.
Is it
It's
not?
early. Sorry, Betty.
Pardon
Sorry,
me?
Betty, go ahead.
Existing problem. It just gets worse as the park visitors come in the summer.
Yeah, but I guess I'm picturing the proposed problem of adding 30 cars to Sunday evening leaving Bowen.
Yeah.
Is not even close to going to be fixed by a ferry marshaling. So I would rather see, rather than Metro being able to say, hey, we gave you your ferry marshaling, therefore we've checked the box. I would rather see the whole problem considered and a holistic solution proposed than predict like what the specific solutions are at this point. Because we're a bunch of volunteers who might get together 3 times a year Metro and Bowen have a much bigger manpower.
So if we get rid of the word at condition of rezoning, then Tyler and Betty, would you be happy just to have it be considered and included in Daniel's report?
You can leave it out if you want to. I think it's important. I think they should pick up part of the price because they're causing the problem right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if we made it broader, I would be fine with it, like there to contribute to the solution somehow to increase ferry traffic, or we can work on the wording. But in general, I'm personally against thinking that I can come up with the answer to a huge complex problem just based off of my understanding at day one. Tim and Judy, you can jump in. Your hands are up.
So I just want to reiterate my first point that I think I agree that we need to have the metrics of what the impacts are, and so congestion in the ferry marshalling on the Bowen side would be an impact. And my thought is, what we would say is we go to the first phase, and at the end of the first phase, when we're ready to think about going to phase 2, we say, well, hang on, more cars here are we've already hit capacity on this issue. And whether it's the capacity of the ferry or the road traffic across the island or parking or whatever it is, once we hit that, then there has to be a solution before we're that's going to make it better, before we're going to add any more visitors. And I'd also point out that we're going to hit this problem anyway, so I'm not sure how much of this we can hang on Metro. I think we've really got to work with Metro because it's all of our problem. So I don't know, I would be careful about saying, okay, you guys have to fix this or else we're not going ahead. How about we have to come up with together a solution.
Therein lies the word binding. At the end of those phases and everything, and we, is it going to be a reality where if they're deciding that they're going to have this park and they're going to have all these campsites and stuff, is it a reality if we say, no, that's it, no more, stop? Is that a reality? We have to be able to write it in there that we can do that somehow. Because I'm not sure that is a realistic proposal from their perspective.
Well, I think the idea would be not that how do we make them stop? It's how do we pause and find a solution before we proceed? And the challenge, as Daniel mentioned earlier, there is no, as far as I can tell, there's no clear approach within a rezoning application to tie things this way. But on a number of fronts here, I think we need that, and maybe working with Metro, we can come up with some kind of agreement that gets attached to the rezoning.
Okay, so for the wording of the recommendation, is it that BIM and Metro Vancouver develop an agreement? Here, I'll put this on screen share
Daniel,
again.
Are we on the right track here?
I'm thinking it's a very complex problem. It's, subject to massive changes suddenly, all over the place. We are in a peak oil situation, and we're trying to get, electrified transit vehicles and, all the rest of it. So if we come to a conclusion now, or we think we have, and come up with something that's going to work, it could easily shift and change on us. So I'd be thinking that, I mean, we've been working on an MOU for the community center, and it's, you know, something where council and Metro, well, I mean, the rumors are that there's movement afoot to cancel the whole transaction, but assuming that this goes through and it is going to be a park and it is, you know, going to eventually have some sort of wish come true for Metro and have camping, transportation is going to be a huge part of this shifting all the time. And we need to have some way of revisiting this on a regular basis. So it's, you know, recommended to council that we bring into place either metrics or fundamental points of agreement and ways that we can adapt this as needed on a regular basis, so that it grows with us and we can figure out solutions.
Okay. Okay.
Come on, Steph, work your
I
magic.
know. I'm usually way better at this. This whole file is so sensitive. So that metrics and fundamental points of agreement be developed. For ongoing checkpoints.
Some sort of regular review.
Thank you.
Something like that possible in the framework of how Metro works, Jeff?
An MOU? We certainly have MOUs with lots of organizations. Just looking there.
Okay, so it's possible. Yeah. All right.
Just reflecting on something that, sorry for interjecting, but that Tyler said, and Tim, you raised as well, is, you know, it's hard to theorize, I guess, solutions to problems that we don't quite know the magnitude of. And I'm a big fan of evidence-based, you know, decision-making and resolution-making, and not to turn this completely up on, you know, the side of its head, but I just don't feel like that Bunt report gives me any comfort that those are, there's data in there, and the assumptions in that report are a starting point for resolutions or to serious impacts that this proposal might have. And so I don't have the historical context, but you know, maybe people are more trusting and have rose-colored glasses on, but I seriously question some of the bias that's inherent in that report. You know, maybe we can go back to the drawing board, but I'm just curious how they were selected. Was there any other, you know, like historical offer of maybe cost sharing in some of that report? Because it's pretty flawed. And this is coming from someone who's, you know, I'm a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners. I've worked in transportation for 15 years. It's pretty bad, respectfully. So I don't know how we, you know, how we come up with resolutions that, you know, with data that we just don't have comfort around.
Okay, looks like we've lost Tyler. Ely, do you want to take over, or I can tell Betty to speak next?
Sure.
You're up.
I wasn't
You're up,
ready.
Ely. You fell off the ship.
At least
Am I
I'm
on
not
the
on
waiting room?
mute anymore. Okay, wait, I gotta get the agenda in front of me. Are we, okay, so are we?
No,
are
we're
we
still in-
spitballing? I mean, are we still spitballing, or are we just, am I
think
doing the hands up thing now?
We're popped out of recommendations again. We're
Okay.
back to spitballing a
Okay,
bit.
okay, Betty.
So I can't see your screen share anymore, but I will ask the question. Do we want to, this is the white sales issue. Do we want some kind of collaboration between BIM and Metro to explore, evaluate or something, the 4 options of getting to the Cape, and if there's any alternative to white sails? I have no idea, but should it be on the table?
Yeah.
I mean, thank you for that, Betty. That's something I'd meant to flag more in the discussion, is that piece on alternative access. And I know in past, you know, in the history of development of proposals on the Cape at various times, there's been alternates proposed or, you know, debated. So just be open for discussion from the committee on that.
Matthew, are you still wanting to talk, or should we go on to Tim?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Tim, Councillor Tim.
Yeah, I'll lower my hand, sorry.
I did it already. Sorry, Matthew.
Yeah, on that last point that you've got, Steph, about the points of agreement, I think we should get the word capacity in there. So
Okay, I'll
the
put her back up there.
points of agreement, when capacity is exceeded, or how we're going to manage when we're over capacity. I don't know. I'm not wordsmithing it very well, but I just, you know, it has to be what the points of agreement are
We'll
about.
say particularly
And we're talking about the metrics of when we say, hang on, this isn't working, that we have agreement on how we're going to.
Does that work, Tim, specifically when capacity has been exceeded?
Yeah, capacity or let's say capacity or impact.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing us back to the recommendation. I appreciate
But when
that.
you say impact, like impact on who? So like, should we include residents?
Well, so it would be impact
know?
basically on Bowen Island residents, on our transportation system, on the ferry marshalling we talked about, just
Like
wherever.
who's going to be listening at that point? And you know, if a group of residents are like, this is making things so much worse, who's going to be the one to say, oh, okay, well, we better go back to Metro Van? And you would hope council would, but
I'm going to pretend I'm the mayor and say this is one phase in many consultations. So this is maybe initial idea that those specifics don't need to be
okay.
chiseled down right now. Daniel, is that correct? Do I sound like the mayor?
It's uncanny. Yeah, I think that's true in terms of, you know,
The level of specificity.
Yeah, if the committee's making recommendations and saying this is something that needs to be worked on, I don't think council would expect you to have it all worked out at this point, as much as you're sort of flagging that like this would be something we want to see.
That reads a little odd to me, specifically when capacity or impact on residents has been exceeded. I don't think impact can exceed something, or maybe it's just the way I'm reading it.
Oh, it's just one of so many things that are going to be fixed offline. But or on residents. How about impacts on residents is untenable.
Oh, that's
Untenable. Yeah. Okay. Or whatever. I'll figure
The challenge is going to be, what's the metric? Like, how do we measure that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gets
What
back to
determines untenability?
yeah.
Ely, Becca has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Becca.
Tyler, you've been replaced.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh,
Can
no,
we go back? Can we go back to Matt's comment about the overall report and can we include something about that? Because I feel like it's really important what he's saying.
Okay, so up here, Tyler said about the.
Yeah, I see that, but
Okay, so give me something else.
Matt, since you seem to know.
Yeah, say less words.
I don't know. I feel like there should, if we're going to commission, you know, a report that looks at prospective impacts of 2 different alternatives, whether it's, you know, single family homes or a proposed park with camping. I think it needs to be like a mutually designated, independent third party. Personally, that's my viewpoint. Because and it's not necessarily the viewpoint of others, but I do raise concerns around bias in the report that I've seen. It's not to say that it can't, with constructive feedback, it can improve, it can't get better. But without there being some type of ability to co-select perhaps a consulting firm, it's hard for me to theorize about solutions or without having data. That's so when I watched the last meeting, that there was a conversation around this. There was some concerns possibly of bias, and so I don't know if those were rectified or if this is an option. But I would be much happier if if Bowen had some type of involvement in the selection of an independent consulting firm to investigate prospective impacts.
I think the conversation last time, I think it was my point that that we could hire someone to review this report professionally rather than go produce it just with limited budget and time. It may be more time and cost effective to simply have a professional acting on our behalf as a reviewer. But your point about constructive feedback, I think you don't even need to use your professional title to see that there's some room for improvement on this report.
Yeah, I like that. If we can turn that into some type of, maybe there's an independent review or a peer review. I'd be supportive of adding that. Once the assumptions get maybe more refined based on some of our feedback.
So is that a peer review or a peer review?
Matt, this is your
But a review by an independent third party.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so not written.
I think there's one interesting point here is that it's still, as Jeff mentioned, being considered a downgrade of land use. But I think that with even a little bit of criticism, at least on the ferry perspective, it would be fairly easy to demonstrate that this is an up scale of ferry use. If the report got to that point, does it really matter whether or not the usage of alternative options varies by 10-20%? I think the major differentiator in my head is whether we're viewing this as an upscale of usage or a downscale of usage.
It's also hypothetical.
Yes.
Just by way of some comment, I'll just jump in. The process is the same. In terms of municipal rezoning process, when I said upzoning, I just meant the intensity of use that is permitted is less under the proposed rezoning than the current one. But the process is the same, so I didn't mean to introduce confusion there.
Yeah, I guess I don't think I'm expressing myself very well, but the prediction of your usage is valuable, and I think helpful in looking at what modes of transportation we have. But the comparison to alternatives may be less useful and more difficult to do with certainty. So I guess I'm just tempering our request for scrutiny on much of the data, like assumptions on whether people in an alternative case are working from home or not, would affect our planning decisions. It's really the proposed use that needs to be dealt with. And we may be opening ourselves up to a bit of a distraction to spend too much effort on multiple alternatives, but that's just me thinking out loud. I see hands from Tim and Becca still up. You're welcome to jump in. Tim is muted.
Get that right. Okay. I think it still gets back to the metrics, and basically, if we start small and measure, then after we've had a year or two, we're going to know what the impact has been and whether the numbers are increasing and decreasing, and we'll do that with counters and data instead of speculation. And no matter what we speculate, we're going to have to deal with the reality of what it is. And that's why I think it's so critically important that we stick to a strict phasing regime that doesn't allow us to expand anymore until we've managed the expansion we've got. And if by some chance, there is a decrease, then we don't have anything to worry about.
I fully agree. I guess I wonder if Metro would be happy if they didn't get past step 1, would be happy with their land acquisition.
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, we're talking about predicting the outcome of a plan versus measuring it as we go. And I think there's value in both because, measuring as we go and adapting our plan allows us to mitigate all sorts of problems and deal with them as they come up. But a good prediction of what's about to happen helps ensure that Metro and Bowen are embarking on a worthwhile journey. If we propose a phased in plan and the first phase is 10 walk-in sites and we hit capacity on the ferry and everything stops working and the metrics don't allow phase 2, I don't know that I would imagine that Metro wouldn't be happy with that outcome.
Yeah, so I could try to answer that. I think through the land, we're in the land use planning part of the proposal, and we're seeking approval for up to 100 sites, no more than that, of overnight sites, overnight camping sites for the proposed park. And the purpose of the rezoning application is to make sure we have land use certainty so that the park could be used for what it was intended for. So I can't speak to what the board would decide if something less was approved. I'm not sure, but certainly the phased approach is something that we are proposing to do and commit to, and to adapt and adjust as needed as that phasing rolls out.
So I think that's the point I'm making. It is that rather than talking about finishing a phase and finding, we're over capacity. At that point, it wouldn't be, okay, it's all over, stop, you can't have any more campsites. It would be, okay, what do we need to do? And I don't think it's all on Metro, because I think we're going to have how do we know that the ferry congestion is all because of we've got 10 more campsites? I'm not sure how we're going to measure that. And there's no question getting these metrics right is going to be tough. But I think the agreement or the MOU that we would attach to it would basically say, if this happens, then Metro and Bowen together need to work out what the solution is so we can proceed to the next step.
What if the solution is like a $20 million fix? Do we have an extra 10 million kicking around that we can
Well,
tuck in? I mean, I'm just saying, it seems kind of,
I think we're getting so far down into
Yeah.
hypotheticals and, you know, possibilities. If we're trying to figure out recommendations for council for the next meeting, we've got enough on our plate, I think, at this point. And, you know, it's not over till the fat lady sings and all the rest of it. I'm sure we'll have more, you know, we're getting more information and we'll have more chances to talk about it. But I think in terms of the information that's on the table, and the questions and answers that we've had with Jeff tonight, that, you know, we have enough to go on. It's 9 o'clock. This is my 5th meeting today. I want to get my leg up in the air. That's killing me. And, you know, enough, please.
Yeah, it's just a layer. Let's get some bullet points down. Do you want me to show it again? They're not set in stone.
I just think Tim's point needs to be underlaid with collecting baseline data right now.
Okay.
agreed.
Summer hasn't come yet. We can collect a lot of data right now and it will be real because we know what we're looking for.
Okay.
Totally agree.
In order to accurately assess the yeah, I'm aware of the grammar. I don't care. It'll happen offline. It's just the key points, you guys, and I'll send it around, but I know you trust me. I've never done wrong by the committee's intentions for the resolutions before. Okay, so we've got the bunt report. This one is specific about, well, this is kind of about the peer review, Tyler. Are those going together, this first one?
No, I don't think the first one requires that we hire anybody. I think they can go fix their report. Someone just needs to
Okay.
point out to them.
And then includes non-vehicle traffic, that there's a peer review on the bunt report, that there's a detailed plan for how foot-only traffic not taking vehicles to Bowen is enforced, metrics for whether or not an adaptive plan are working and can be implemented. Oh, is this in other parks? Metrics on how, is that right? Tyler, I think it was on.
I was gone. I dropped off for this one.
Isn't that how we will establish the baselines for each of those phases and if things are working for us?
No, this was about other parks and had they,
Oh, okay.
that was you, Tyler. It was a long time ago.
Oh, was that stuff like metrics on transit accessible campsites in other
Yes.
Metro Vancouver
Oh,
parks?
yeah.
Metrics on how adaptive plans and other Metro Vancouver parks are working and can be implemented on Bowen. That work?
Well, if that was my point, that was how transit access was working in other parks in Metro. I don't know if no one understands the point. I think we can delete it.
Okay,
So next one.
that Metro Vancouver collaborate with the Bowen Island municipality to establish a marine docking option. This is going to get you guys all going again. I'm going to skim over it quickly. Okay, just the idea of marine access. Okay, calm down. Next one, that Metro Vancouver make a solid commitment to planning and ferry marshaling, that metrics and fundamental points of agreement be developed for regular review, that baseline data be collected right away. And that is, do you want me to say including white sails? Oh, sorry, this was included. Explore and evaluate the four different options to get to, sorry, to
I
access.
think White Sales is one of the 4 options.
Yeah, I think
Yes,
it's 3.
that's what I'm thinking too, yeah.
Leave
So-
the number out, just evaluate different.
Yeah.
And leave white sales out, or that don't involve white sales.
Leave it for now.
Okay,
Options 2 white sales. Alternatives, sorry.
To the Cape.
Yeah.
that's it. Mover.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Jeffrey.
Haven't voted yet.
Okay, I guess we have to vote.
Tyler,
All in
you have
favor?
one job.
Well, we're not sending out your poor grammar, but I guess we can vote on the idea of a resolution.
You're voting on ideas.
I thought we would email vote. Are we gonna vote now? We're gonna
You
put up
gotta
their
vote
hands?
now.
Okay, I'm in favor.
Okay.
What are we voting on?
Our
recommend-
draft resolution being a good idea to fix.
The
and send
grammatically
out.
incorrect resolution that we fixed when I've not worked 12 hours a day, 17 days in a row, and can take a moment to edit it. Abusers.
I'll second that.
Okay. I saw lots of hands, Steph. Are you happy?
God. Okay. Goodbye.
Okay, thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks, everyone. Guess we'll adjourn the meeting at 9:02.
Thanks for the
Motion to
invitation.
adjourn.
Good to meet everybody.
Thanks, Jeff.
Welcome,
Appreciate it.
welcome all new people.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Not
everyone.
normally like
Buddy.
this.
Good night.
Bye.
The